Hello YouTube. As most of you probably know, I posted a video the other day titled The Gender Dilemma, Episode 2, Dismantling Patriarchy Theory, Part 1, Introduction, Sexual Dimorphism. In the video I used these clips from Gnomelord0.
Now before I start, there's one thing I want to make perfectly clear. Ideologically, I'm coming at this from the premise that men and women are basically the same. We apart from a few biological things, there are no fundamental differences between men and women. Neither gender is smarter than the other, or funnier than the other, or more capable than the other. Neither one's better at math or driving. Beyond from the really, really basic biological stuff, like women can give birth and men have penises, there's really no fundamental difference. We deserve to be treated equally. We're just as capable of everything as the other gender. So, sexism. Human beings have been around for about 130 to 150,000 years, give or take. And every single society in that time period has been sexist against women. Men have been in charge in every country, every time period, ever. So there's never been a matriarchal society in history. In fact, every society has been patriarchal. And for most of human history, the question is not which societies are sexist and which ones aren't sexist. It's which societies are less sexist. So back then, when there's limited food and there's very little shelter and not very much in terms of clothing, and you're nomadic, it was pretty hard to get a nice, being out of commission meant that you couldn't do very much. And so, because men got control of the weaponry, because we weren't constantly having kids, men basically got to decide the rules. Because if I have a spear, and someone else is telling me, hey, this is a violation of basic human rights, I have the great response. Hey, guess what? Don't listen to me, I kill you. It's the method used by dictatorships all over the world.
Well, he responded in the comments section to my video. Gnomelord0 said, I love it when people who have no specialization in fields presume to talk about them. This should be fun. Because God forbid studying history or gender studies before talking about it. The first thing I'd like to point out here is the words, this should be fun, which indicate he hasn't watched the video before commenting. Yet he has taken it upon himself to presume that I have no knowledge in either history or gender studies. I replied, and you know the extent of my education knowledge how exactly? Gnomelord0 replied, well, clearly you haven't studied any women's history or gender studies, since you don't address or reference anything there. Haven't studied anything to do with beauty or sexual psychology either, since the fact that you think that male strippers all have a universal type, which isn't true, since other countries have different definitions of male attractiveness than the US. Fun fact, in Japan what we consider feminine they consider masculine, because there is not universal standard for beauty. The ancient Greeks thought small penises were the hottest thing ever. For that matter, no knowledge of sociology, anthropology or early human history, since you imply that women got to choose mates when most early tribal cultures were in fact polygamist, so no expertise there. You also clearly have studied the history of early science, since you don't even realize how much you are sounding like a mid-1800s eugenicists, or maybe you don't care. Finally, you don't even understand psychology, because the fact that men are larger did not come around in the 150,000 years of our existence. The species we evolved from already had sexual dimorphism. Nothing about our early existence created such dramatic physical changes in our bodies. We are only 150,000 years old, there isn't enough time for that to happen. Evolution is not intelligent the way you seem to think it is, it's random. This is social Darwinist shit right here. And looking at your profile a bit, you clearly haven't studied any theology, since your criticism of religion are just embarrassing. I'm an atheist and it is just the most ill-informed nonsense you have ever seen. I'll deal with these claims when we get to his video. But he continues. So yes, yet again we have people with no expertise in a subject pretending they understand it. What a surprise. I'm making a response video obviously, and I will say though, thanks for making me feel better about the quality of my videos, because frankly I might have a terrible lighting effect, but at least I don't have to watch the same animation drone on with the slowest possible voice ever. How rude. Anyway, I replied. Can't wait for your response. Feel free to post a link. And then Gnomelord0 replied. Certainly, I'm cutting it into chunks so that people don't have to go into a trance to get through it. Seriously, almost 50 minutes, half of which is watching a speak and spell of a repeated animation loop. This is like that movie Blue. But again, I don't see how somebody who hasn't studied the basics of any of the subjects they pontification has opinions that are worth caring about. Yeah dude, my animation isn't looped. It's also irrelevant to the arguments I made. And of course he's yet to show that I don't have knowledge of the subject of the video. So I replied to his emotional ramblings with, "Wow, someone sounds very insecure about having their ideology challenged." He replied with, "Cute. Wanting somebody who speaks about a subject to display any degree of knowledge about that subject is not insecurity, that is how academia works. People who don't study history know jack shit about history. If we are fine about dismissing creationists because they don't study science, and yet we are cool with people who don't study sociology, anthropology, women's history, general history, or for that matter evolutionary biology, since sexual dimorphism did not emerge over 150,000 years, talking about those subjects? I change my mind all the time when people who have studied the subjects explain that. Not when amateurs peddle conspiracy theories. Why should anybody change their mind when talking to people who haven't studied the subject? Like, I hate Ayn Rand, but I actually read Atlas Shrugged and her other works, which hurt, believe me, and then I can say yeah, this sucks. But if somebody says Ayn Rand is terrible because she wants us to kill all the poor, and no, I have never read any of it, that is ignorant. She is terrible because she wants to keep the poor people poor. Just a word of warning, he rambles off topic like this in the upcoming video. But he wasn't finished yet. He continues with, "Not to mention the utterly absurdity of ideology challenge that is universally true. Anybody who says otherwise is just lying. Would you change your ideology on some subject you're familiar with, what that might be, clearly not gender studies, because some guy who hasn't studied the subject will be like, you're wrong because I say so? I mean, do you convert when missionaries come to your door? You don't like having your ideology challenged is a buzzword. It's like the term rational. Just because you say it doesn't mean that it has any meaning. Actually, the reason I said he doesn't like having his ideology challenged is because he is clearly arguing here from emotion. He is on the defensive, I suspect, because his self-identity is so closely associated with his ideology that to criticize one is seen as a personal attack on the other. Now I should point out that in my video, I made no personal attacks on him. I simply used his explanation of patriarchy theory as an example of the feminist view on the topic. I even said that I thought he does a fairly good job of summing up feminist patriarchy theory. The video was not about him, but about patriarchy theory. And at no point did I resort to ad hom attacks. At least one of us can say that. I could have very easily pointed out his poor video quality, or the way he looks, or his lisp, or any number of other easy targets, if I wished. But the video was not about him, and I actually prefer to stick to the arguments in question. And now he's made a 30-minute mess of a response, so let's get stuck into it.
Angry white man, and I'm internet famous now! It's awesome! I've had my first misogynist, closed-minded, anti-intellectual conspiracy theorist respond to my video. That makes me a real internet person now.
So not even 10 seconds in, and already we have the first mistake. I didn't respond to his video, I simply used clips from his video as evidence. The exact same way I used longer clips from Professor Robert Sapolsky and Professor Simon Baron-Cohen. I wasn't replying to them either. If I was actually responding to Gnomelord0, I would have spent a lot more time talking about his actual video, instead of spending 41 minutes talking about patriarchy theory, which was the actual topic of my video. Also please note, that not even 10 seconds in and this guy is resorting to ad homs. Apparently I'm a misogynist, close-minded, anti-intellectual, conspiracy theorist. I'll let my regular viewers, who actually watch my work, come to their own conclusions regarding the first three. But I did have a good laugh at the conspiracy theorist bit, considering some of my early work on this channel was making fun of conspiracy theorists. I also have a long-time friend, who unfortunately has become a bit of a conspiracy theorist these days, who I'm sure has grown to hate me, considering the amount of time I spend on Facebook pointing out his erroneous claims. But I have to ask Gnomelord, who exactly do you think is conspiring in this so-called conspiracy theory? Mother Nature, perhaps? Next.
I want to thank everyone involved. I really want to thank the Dogma 95 movement for inspiring me. I want to thank feminism for, having the verbal shit beaten out of them for the last 5 years. That means that anyone talking about feminism will automatically get the attention and so much more views than they otherwise would. I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. Anyways, so for those who haven't been paying attention, which is, all of YouTube, I was doing my normal thing, making videos, talking intellectual, being the most perfect human being to have ever existed and been graced in this world. And I made a video talking about the origin of patriarchy, the origin of sexism. And basically one of the assumptions I made was that there is, beyond some few basic things, there's no real differences between men and women. And I got my first response video. And before I go on, I want to talk about my format here, because let's talk about quote mining. For those of you who want to be intellectuals in this world, who want to, critically think, who want to be free thinkers, who want to learn about the world, always be wary when there's a sample of someone else's work taken, and it's cut off very abruptly.
Oh boy. This guy's lack of self-awareness is astounding. I'm guessing most of you, if not all of you, who actually have the ability to comprehend what you are watching, have noticed that this guy talks extremely fast, without any real pauses between sentences. Which makes it virtually impossible to edit without an abrupt stop. So no quote mining here.
Like, there's ever sort of odd moment where, wait, what were they saying there? Always worth noting it, because, I'm featured 3 times in this gentleman's video. And each time there's sort of the very bizarre cuts that I'm sort of like, I'm in the middle of something and then it cuts to something else and then it cuts to something else. Because if you actually watch my video, there's actually a lot more to what's going on. But that's inconvenient. So I'm
the video I actually linked to.
Posting a link to it right here. Go on, watch it. But I do warn you though, the thing that pissed me off more than anything else was not the fact that this guy's a misogynist or, a bit of a eugenicist.
That's a new one. Can't wait for him to explain that.
It's the fact that he's really boring. It's impressively boring. The 48-minute video, and it could have been cut down to maybe 24 minutes if he didn't use the fucking, Vobot speaker voice. Because it's just a skull in, a Kool-Aid jar talking with a robot voice. It's really boring. So,
Well, I have just under 10,000 subscribers who would disagree. But this guy is entitled to his opinion. And I don't expect everyone to like my format. And it doesn't bother me that he finds it boring. However, the way my arguments are packaged is irrelevant to my actual arguments. And this is just a derailing tactic on his behalf. It would be like me saying there is no patriarchy, because this guy makes videos in his kitchen.
I'm no longer apologizing for my shitty quality right now. I am taking that all back, because you know what? Dogma 95, we're going to go all out. This is so much better. So I had notes taken from me, like any good feminist. I had a woman make notes for me. My lovely assistant, who's just off camera over there, and my other lovely assistant, who's also off camera over there. Don't you dare get on camera! You're gonna ruin my. You're gonna take the spotlight away from me. And I'm gonna just read off these notes and just go through it, unscripted. Just talking, because that's what people who are actually smart can do.
And by unscripted, he means ramble on without making a point, or take a breath. Can you imagine being stuck on a plane next to this guy?
They don't need a script. They don't need a controlled environment. They can just talk, and in talking, you can see what point they're saying. And because I'm awesome and I'm actually smart and I'm not some sort of pseudo-intellectual.
He's also modest and very self-aware.
I can do that. So first off, let's talk about what you need to do to talk about a subject. I'm going to come out right now, despite the fact that I'm the perfect human being ever made, I actually know very little about quantum physics. In fact, I'm going to take that back. I know nothing about quantum physics. I've never studied quantum physics. And sometimes people tell me things about quantum physics that don't make any goddamn sense. Quantum physicists come to me and say, dude, time, it's not linear. It's not linear. Time does not go in a line. And I say, that makes no goddamn sense. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Of course time is linear. It's time.
And here is an example of why some people use a script. Sorry folks, but he rambles on like this for most of his video.
And it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand why on earth would time not be linear. But, to argue with them, I'd have to study quantum physics. I don't want to study quantum physics. I don't think I'd be particularly good at it. So you know what? I don't understand it. I don't get it. But I'm just going to go along with what the really, really smart people who study this all their lives say about the subject. If I want to disagree with them, I'm going to have to study it. Then that's not to say that experts can't be wrong. They can be. They frequently are. But if you're going to criticize the subject, and I'm just, if you're going to talk about, say something like, say, a certain religion is the worst thing ever, and the worst religion ever made by a human, it would behoove you to actually read it. Which, I did. I read it. Anyways, or let's use an example that's not completely terrible. I hate communism. If you've seen my earlier videos, I am not a fan of communism. I do not like communism. I'm not that big into socialism. I really hate communism. I've read every single major communist writer out there. I've read Marx, I've read Engels, I've read Brecht, I've read Mao, I've read Pol Pot, I've read Trotsky, I've read Lenin, I watched Eisenstein. I've gone through a ton of different Marxist and communist writers and read what they had to say. And then I say, this is bullshit. So if you're going to talk about history, and you're going to talk about, women's history, because that's an actual subject taught in colleges, that people who dedicate their entire lives to studying that subject, you're going to have to, read what they say.
Of course, he assumes I haven't done this. If I were to guess, the fact I disagree with his ideology has led him to conclude that I don't understand his ideology. This comes from the assumption that one's ideology is so perfect, and without fault, that anyone exposed to its perfection will instantly be converted to a true believer. As an atheist, I've come across this line of thinking before, where I've been told that, if I just read the Bible I'd become a true believer. Unfortunately for them, reading the Bible had the opposite effect on me. The same can be said for feminist gender studies. Disagreement does not equal ignorance of a subject. I guess he could also be accused of using the appeal to authority fallacy. Just because gender studies is taught in universities, does not mean it is without fault. Of course he ignores this later when he criticizes evolutionary psychology. But we'll get to that later.
And not the random people on the internet, because he does a post to some random person who has no significance. You have to post with some of the actual movers and shakers of the movement. So, anyway, let's go into the details. He's trying to prove, and if you don't want to watch it, please watch it. It's painful, it's boring, it lacks any of the wit and humor that I can offer you. He's not nearly as handsome as I am, because I have flesh.
And a lot of it. Sorry folks. I really couldn't resist that one. Trust me, I tried.
But, go watch it. That way people can't go about oh, he's doing the exact same thing that the other person did of quote mining. Go watch it, come back, watch this. It's going to be a painful, miserable experience, but I promise I'll make it up to you. Because, I'm a beautiful human being. So, and humble. Very humble. So, the argument that he is making, essentially, is evolutionary psychology.
Well, we are now 6 minutes into his video, and he is finally addressing my arguments.
Evolution dictates that human beings are separate. That men and women are separate due to our origin. And that any claim otherwise is some sort of feminist thing.
Now before he continues, let me play a clip from my video.
Some of the differences in the way the mind develops in boys and girls and the way the brain develops in boys and girls may reflect genetic differences. And if genes are involved, then it's only one small step to imagine that these may have been shaped by evolution, selected by evolution. And one view is that, in fact, in our early ancestry, our hominid ancestry, males and females occupied very different niches, different roles, with females taking much more of a role in childcare and in the community, much more of a social role, and with males having a much more of a solitary role in navigation of the landscape in search of resources. My own position is that I think biology and culture interact to create these sex differences. So I'm not a strong biological determinist, but neither am I a strong cultural or social determinist. I think there's a mix that comes together to create them. There are some people who would argue just for biology or just for culture, but I think the moderate position is to recognise that both are at work. I think there's a responsibility for people who look at sex differences to do so in a very careful, evidence-based way. It's very easy to make sweeping statements about groups of people, including the two sexes, which could easily become forms of discrimination or generalizations which simply don't apply. So research in this area, I think, can proceed, but it has to be very responsible. It has to be done in a responsible fashion. So not claiming more than can be reasonably claimed on the basis of evidence.
I would agree that gender is neither just genetics, nor is it just culture, but an extremely complex combination of the two. Environment shapes evolution, and in turn, evolution shapes culture. Culture thus becomes the new environment, which in turn shapes evolution. And around we go. But in modern times, cultural development and change has left evolution far behind in the dust. The Western diet, based on a desire for fatty foods, is the perfect example. Fatty food was once both a rarity and an advantage. Now it's in abundance and is a health issue. So to be clear, I'm arguing from the viewpoint that gender differences are a complex mix of both genetics and cultural influences. And you'd be ignorant to assume the influence of only one of these factors. But let's hear more from Gnomelord.
Conspiracy thing. And like most of these people, this guy's coming from sort of the atheist cult of rationality thing, which is funny because he doesn't understand evolution all that well. So let's go through a few things. First off, before you can make a claim that women and men are different beyond some very base differences, you're going to have to prove that. This is science here, fellas. And I say fellas because, you know, most of you are men, let's be honest. Right. So, how are you going to prove that beyond basic things like men being a little bit bigger and women being able to make tiny people out of their bellies, how are you going to prove differences without any other mitigating factors? After all, if I went to, if I collected a bunch of men from one of the poorest, most war-torn regions, let's go eastern Somalia, and I put them next to some of the best educated women from, who grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, and I said, okay, we're gonna see who can prove to be better at managing finances. Go. That's not really a fair comparison. Even if the women win, I'm choosing deliberately a women win one because maybe you might, because I know you're not capable of sympathy or basic empathy, so you might be able to understand this one. If the women win, that doesn't actually necessarily prove any gender thing. That just proves that people from a certain circumstantial background are able to have skill sets that come from that. So, if we're going to go with, if you're trying to prove that women are not able to do things as well as men,
which is a claim I never made, for the record,
you're going to have to make a pretty good experiment that removes any other societal factors. And here's one thing I just want to remind you. Every single job that women currently have was once stated women couldn't do. Secretaries. Everybody knew that only men could be secretaries. Women can handle the complicated little machines like this. The brains are really small. And today the word secretary literally is invocative of a woman. Nurses. Everybody knew that only men with their powerful intellectual penises could do nursing jobs. Because, you know, only men were capable of that sort of, you know, masculine healing power. And you know, I mean, heck, if you look at the earliest nurses in history, they were not allowed to be nurses until warfare had gotten to the point where so many men were being taken to the front they needed to rely on nurses. And suddenly, again, nurse is a feminine word. We think nurse, we think women. How about, soldier? In many countries today, women are seen as not being able to be soldiers, but Israel has been doing pretty well, actually. The Soviet Union did it. People's Republic of China did it. And, the latter two have military problems with weren't because of their women. They were because of their, being oppressive and incompetent dictatorships. So, what is a job that hasn't been said that only men can do it? Because we have, women couldn't be lawyers. Women couldn't be doctors. Women couldn't be businessmen. Women couldn't be actresses. Remember, in Shakespeare's time, the men played the female characters. Women can't be actresses. That's ridiculous. They're being two people at once. That would cause their brains to melt. That would be terrible. And of course, now we have actresses, doctors, lawyers, businesswomen, politicians, police women, firewomen, firefighter women. Firewomen would be much more terrifying, and now I'm going to kind of stream of consciousness thing of female fire, beating the crap out of people. Anyways, so see, that's what happens when smart people talk really fast for a long period of time. You get into really interesting places.
And this is what happens when someone doesn't choose a script. Once again, at no point did I claim that modern women are less capable of doing any job than males. I did, however, explain that the origin of gender roles was based on reproduction and the protection of females in early human society.
Of course, stream of consciousness. Read it. You're not going to. Anyways, so the fact is, it is worth noting that the same sort of logic of women can't do this, we've heard that one before. Those of us who study history know this game. We've done this round. Of course women can't do the thing because, women can't be teachers because women can't do the blah, 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 and then they do it, and then we just find a new profession. So, next point. On that note, every oppressive regime, culture, group, every oppressive thing that has ever happened in history always tries to justify their oppression. Even North Korea doesn't justify its mass mistreatment of its citizens by being yeah, we're just dicks. We just like watching people starve. It's just what we do. We just, we get our kicks off of that. You don't do that. You always try to oppress it. And they always find something. It's culture, it's history, it's religion. And I notice that plenty of you people seem more than willing to be oh, religion's been used to justify all the terrible things ever. But it's also science. And that doesn't mean science is bad any more than it means religion or culture is bad. It's just, it is used. It has been used historically. So, I'm going to take you back to a magical time.
The word "that" has been used historically to justify badness. So we should never use the word "that."
Yes, exactly. Do you want to come back? You want to come to camera again?
No, I'm a sickie.
Okay.
But I apparently have a tradition of invading.
Yes. Let's go back to a magical time, a beautiful time called the mid-1800s. And for those of you who don't do history, which is all of you,
included.
Yes. Well, I'm talking about you MRA people here. That's when slavery was still a thing in the South. There was a war that happened. So back then, what did people use to justify the systematic oppression of white people? Or if we want to go out of an American context, what about colonialism? What was the justification used? Oh, right, it was scientific. After all the great scientists said that black people were just inferior to white people. The skulls are shaped differently. They just don't understand. Black people can't do the same thing as the white man. The white man is this noble, beautiful race, capable of so much more. And scientists said so. The Soviet Union justified a lot of their atrocities through science. The Nazis famously did it. Now, some of you are going to be saying, but that was bad science. Yes, it was bad science, but...
Just like gender studies.
It was pretty generally... The general consensus was it was science. Most people agreed to it. Most people thought it was true. And, it's in the natural interest of those in power to justify being in power. And if they will find a way to do it, they will do it. Be it religion, be it science, be it culture, be
it feminist gender theory.
Whatever, they will do it. Science is not some sort of sacred, beautiful thing that's never been tarnished. It's been used for evil plenty of times, and I'm not saying this as someone who wants to get rid of science. Not only am I an atheist here, I like science. I think science is pretty cool. Fact is, though, it can be used for evil just as easily as anything else. Alright, let's go back to, toss this aside.
So, I'm not exactly sure what his point was, in that long inane ramble. But if I were to guess, his argument is, because some people might use gender differences that have a genetic origin, as a means of discrimination, we should therefore discard any science related to genetic differences. I'm sorry, but science doesn't work that way. Yes, it is true that some people will try to use science, or pseudoscience, like gender studies, to justify an ideological position. But we shouldn't discard facts, or evidence, because of this. Evolutionary science is either true or false based on it being either true or false. Not based on how it might be misused, or how it might make someone feel. Gravity is a fact which is easily demonstrated. But someone claiming that they don't believe in gravity, because they are afraid of falling, is just lunacy. And in no way a legitimate argument.
Excitement earlier. Oh yeah, so, on the subject of, you're talking about, he uses a few terms, and it's kind of adorable. One, because there's a skull in a fucking Kool-Aid jar, using the same animation over and over and over and over again. And it makes me look professional, and Jesus Christ, here, look at my lighting effect. You know. But the fact is, he keeps using terms like bias, or ad hominem, or fallacy. And the thing is, words have meaning. Like, they have meanings. If you want to have a bias, you need to prove a bias. That is, in fact, something that those of us in academic circles do that all the time. You want to prove a bias? Fine. You need to prove the bias. You need to have the source, you need to have the citations, you need to have the hypothesis, you need to prove it. Because saying the word bias is the same way people, politicians always say, God bless America.
Well, I just did a word search of my script for that video, and I found the word bias once. It was here.
If I have a spear, and someone else is telling me, hey, this is a violation of basic human rights, I have the great response. Hey, guess what? Don't listen to me, I kill you. It's the method used by dictatorships all over the world.
The link to that guy's full video is below, as always. He does a fairly good job at summing up feminist patriarchy theory. But the question should be, is this an accurate version of history? Or is it bias, bigoted, oversimplified ideology? So, the one time I used the word is in a question, which the series is responding to. And considering the series is not yet complete, it's a strange argument to make that I haven't proven the case. But I guess that's what you get when someone like Gnomelord starts with a predetermined conclusion, before actually listening to the argument.
It's a meaningless term. Everyone uses it, it becomes meaningless. Or, let's do with the video game metaphor, and most of these people are gamer gators anyways. It's like when reviewers say cinematic or emotional. They don't mean anything anymore. You need to be able to prove it. Right. So, let's talk evolutionary psychology.
Finally. It's only taken half his video response to get here. Now let's see if he actually debunks anything I said. Or just continues to talk in circles.
It is a young field. A very young field.
Just like gender studies.
Psychology has only been around for about a century now. We're sort of entering its, we've just passed its 100th birthday fairly recently. Psychology is a young field. And remember, in that young, and when things are new, when fields of studies are new, there are a lot of fuck-ups.
Just like gender studies.
There are a lot of fuck-ups. Let's do psychology. Most psychologists today look at Freud and go, yeah, that wasn't actually very much science. That was just philosophy pretending to be science. Or Jung, Or how about all of the extremely unscientific experiments that were done? Cough, cough. Stanford prison experiment, cough, cough, Milgram experiment. Fact is, new fields of study take a while before they can really become absolute truth. And there
just like gender studies.
are some things you can have absolute truth in. For example, evolution is real. We know this. Or at least, it is as if everything we know about the universe right now is true, then evolution is real. Maybe something else will come up tomorrow that will change everything that we know. But right now, it's real. Oh, Fact is, evolutionary psychology does not rely on nearly as much hard data in that way, which is not inherently a bad thing. But, more to the point, how do I put this? It's been used for bad things before.
Just like gender studies.
Very bad things. We call that eugenics.
So before moving on, let's look at the meaning of the word eugenics, just so we are all on the same page. The science of improving a population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics. Which is essentially what we have done to dog breeds, or what the Nazis attempted with the so-called master race.
Eugenics, boys and girls, is where people say that certain races have certain traits, and then we kill them. Or when we take the mentally ill, put them in cars and gas them to death. Or when we take entire groups of people based upon their race, enslave them, and strip resources from the country, and then tell them that they have to be happy to us for doing it. That's called eugenics, with the official slogan of... So the fact is, and I'm not saying that all evolutionary psychology is eugenics, but of course if I'm getting quote mined, we're going to have a little section where that part of this is taken and nothing else is taken out of context. So look forward to that. But he talks about, he cites an article of a woman saying, I'm only responding to the first half of this. I'm going to respond to the actual scientist he cites in the next video, but we're just focusing on what he said as an animated skull in a Kool-Aid jar, because such a valuable contribution to the human species. Fact is, young fields of science have a lot of things they haven't proved yet.
Just like gender studies.
There's a lot of pre-arranged biases from existing culture.
Just like gender studies.
They have to overcome. And when it comes to the matter of human rights, you better be damn fucking certain that they're not going to have any sort of overlap there. Because when a new field of science says the exact same thing that centuries of oppression have been saying... Which
it doesn't. Nor do I ever make the argument that gender or race make one group superior or inferior to another.
I call that suspicious. You know, I'm not even saying that evolutionary science should be wiped out or removed, that we should never have it. I think it's a fine field, but I think if we take it as law, if we quote it as the absolute truth when it's a young field that still has not even left its infancy.
Just like gender studies.
Yeah, there's gonna be problems. Anyways. Let's go to the main crux of the argument. The main thing here.
For fuck's sake. Please. Actually address something I've said. So far the only arguments he's made are, I shouldn't have used the word bias. Evolutionary psychology should be ignored, as some people may try to misuse it. And he doesn't like my animation. So please, dude, can you please actually make some kind of argument about something I actually said in my video? Please. Just one real actual point. And not long-winded gibberish.
Men, on average, are bigger than women. Which is what I actually said in my initial video, but he didn't show that part. And if you'd watched my initial video, I actually said that. Men, on average, are bigger than women. Who cares? Who gives a shit? Because guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're not living in a tribal society anymore. Most of us. In fact,
actually, I discussed other differences apart from height. But the reason I discussed a tribal setting is because I was discussing the origins of gender roles and patriarchy. Both of which did not just magically pop into existence on a Tuesday afternoon last week, but actually have their origin in our earliest social structures. The clue should be in the word origin.
The vast majority of the human species has moved on. Evolution moves extremely slowly. And it has not caught up to us, because from an evolutionary perspective, most of us should be dead. But we're not. Because we, invented shit. Like, I'm talking into a piece of plastic right now, and that's being communicated to fucking Bangkok. That wasn't really in our evolutionary genes. Like, yeah, men are a little bit bigger. Does that make us smarter? Does that make us more insightful? Does that make us more worthy of human rights? No.
None of which I claimed at any point.
We have a little bit more body mass. Who gives a shit? But even if let's go into the argument he makes. He quotes one feminist person who says that, who offers a theory that the reason why men are bigger and women are smaller is because men eat more food.
Actually, I quote a paper by two academic feminists. The first is Priscilla Turrell, Ph.D., whose expertise is listed as gender studies, social anthropology, evolutionary biology, behavioral ecology, and evolution. The second is Pierre-Henri Gouillon, Ph.D., who has a very long list of expertise, mainly centered around evolution. Now this is an interesting point, as Gnomelord expressed earlier, time and time again, that before commenting on a topic, you should be educated in that topic. And his whole argument in the early part of his video seemed to be, that because he is educated in gender studies, and for some unexplained reason I'm not, his worldview trumps anything I have to say, no matter the reasoning, logic or evidence behind my argument. So here we have two PhDs, who are clearly very well educated. More so on the topic of evolution than either Gnomelord or myself, I would guess, yet this is what he has to say about their theory.
And that theory is bullshit. And he says it's bullshit. But he said that that theory is indicative of all of feminism. And I want to say...
Actually, my exact words were, so according to some. Just so you know for future reference, Gnomelord, the word some, is not equivalent to, indicative of all. I also read parts of a Jezebel article by Lindy West. Jezebel is representative of mainstream feminism. My goal was to represent both less educated mainstream feminism, as well as academic feminists which have taken an extreme view based on ideology. The same ideology that Gnomelord is regurgitating here, by the way. Although to be fair, I give him credit for at least calling bullshit on the more extreme academic feminists. You know, like I do. Does that make Gnomelord a misogynistic, close-minded, anti-intellectual, conspiracy theorist?
These people, when they argue with creationists, and creationists are like, this one atheist person, advocated that slavery was a good thing, they're like, well, that doesn't make all atheists true. But when you try to apply it to a field that they don't like, suddenly it's all out the window, because ethical consistency, who needs that? I mean, fuck, these guys remind me of creationists. They're about much intellectual integrity. For example, for someone who talks about evolution a great deal, there's a great deal of almost, intelligent design to this. For example, the argument he uses, basically, is that, men go forth, they hunt, and the stronger men return, and that continues the gene pool, and that kind of...
Okay, so before going on, here is what I said. It also accounts for males being on average taller, and physically stronger. A male who is physically stronger is more likely to survive, and pass on his genes. He is also more likely to be chosen as a mate by a female, as he is not only more likely to be a good provider and protector, but his offspring are more likely to survive, and pass on their own genes. This is basic evolution.
Ignores the fact, and that makes our species stronger, which ignores the factor of dumb fucking luck. One of the major parts of evolution is not smart. There's no consciousness to evolution. Men have nipples, for God's sake. These are useless. These do nothing. My appendix, my tonsils, my tailbone, this is useless. It does nothing. It's because evolution is not a rational thought process. It's just what happens. If aliens came down and every single human being over 6'2" spontaneously died, like they just all died, and any person who had the biological capability to become 6'2" died, and our species eventually evolved, for whatever arbitrary reason, our species eventually evolved differently, that wouldn't make it better. That just means that we just had a different gene pool. Or let's say all of humanity died out. Every single human being died out, except for the population of Madagascar, which, by the way, is the same size as Greenland. Who knew? What if everyone died except for Madagascar? Madagascar is all that's left of humanity, and they continue on. That doesn't make it better. That doesn't make the Madagascar population, genetically superior. They're just...
And at no point did I ever say anything about one group being genetically superior to another. My point was environment caused different evolutionary adaptation, as well as gender roles in early human societies. I never said one gender or race is superior or inferior. Now normally, at this point I would accuse my opposition of trying to use a straw man argument. But I don't think he is purposely trying to misrepresent me. I think he is actually just too stupid to understand what I was saying. Add to that, the fact that he came to the conclusion of what I was going to say, before listening to what I actually said. But let's take a moment to talk about environmental-based evolutionary adaptation. I know a couple of people who have been to Nepal, and wouldn't mind going there one day myself, as it sounds like an amazing experience. One of the issues with going to Nepal is altitude sickness. Because it is so high up, and the oxygen levels are lower than at sea level, it means your body has to create more red blood cells to carry oxygen. From what I've read, this can cause illness and even death in some people because of clotting, if I remember correctly. But most people adapt within a short period of time, without any problems. One of my friends who has been there, told me that after his return he had a medical checkup, and the doctor, not knowing where he had been, was amazed at his high level of red blood cells. Of course, these levels quickly return to normal, as such high levels at sea level aren't needed. But the locals, who have been there for countless generations, are different. From understanding evolution, the evolutionary adaptations that allow Tibetans to function at high altitudes are very different from the acclimatization process that most of us go through when we spend time in those places. When lowlanders visit Denver, La Paz, or Lhasa, for example, their bodies begin to produce more red blood cells, the purveyors of oxygen in their body. These extra cells seem to help transport available oxygen around the body and may eventually compensate for decreased oxygen levels, allowing breathing and heart rate to return to normal. This is an example of phenotypic plasticity, shifts in an organism's body, physiology, or behavior that are dependent upon the environment it occupies, not upon a genetic change. The switch to producing more red blood cells that occurs when a lowlander visits Lhasa does not reflect a new mutation, but rather the body's response to a new environment. Because they don't reflect a shift in the genetic makeup of a population, such changes, which occur within the lifespan of a single individual, are not adaptations in an evolutionary sense. The Tibetan Highlander population, on the other hand, has, over the course of thousands of years, evolved adaptations that allow individuals to thrive in a low-oxygen environment. Paradoxically, one of these adaptations is almost exactly the opposite of a lowlander's response to high altitude. Tibetans have gene versions that cause them to produce fewer red blood cells. How is that helpful? It turns out that extra red blood cells make blood thicker, more like honey than water, and after a certain point, this cell-laden blood can actually get so thick that it doesn't pass through capillaries efficiently to oxygenate cells. Having blood with too many red blood cells can be particularly problematic during pregnancy, since it is linked to slow fetal growth and high rates of fetal mortality. One study found that Han Chinese people, lowland relatives of Tibetans whose bodies respond to high altitudes by producing more red blood cells, living in the Tibetan highlands, were 3 times as likely to suffer pre- or postnatal infant death than were ethnic Tibetans. In the long run, producing extra red blood cells may do more harm than good. The basis for the Tibetans' adaptation is not a change in a gene that produces hemoglobin or any one of the other proteins that make up red blood cells. Instead, the key change seems to be in a stretch of DNA, called EPAS1, which codes for a regulatory protein. This protein senses oxygen and helps control the process of producing red blood cells. The change in EPAS1 seems to make Tibetans less likely to overproduce red blood cells at extreme altitudes and, hence, probably helps them to avoid altitude sickness and deliver oxygen more effectively to developing fetuses. Other unique traits of Tibetans: a higher breathing rate and blood vessels which expand to allow better oxygen transport, likely also contribute to their altitude aptitude. Scientists recently narrowed in on this explanation through a series of studies that all pointed to EPAS1 as a key player in Tibetans' altitude adaptation. One group of biologists compared the genomes of ethnic Tibetans to the genomes of Han Chinese individuals, as well as to the genomes of distantly related Danes. The basic reasoning was that if a particular gene version is found at high frequency in Tibetans and low frequency in their close and distant relatives, that gene version probably rose to high frequency in the Tibetan population recently through the action of natural selection. The most extreme differences in gene version frequency the scientists observed were in the EPAS1 gene. Another group of scientists observed similar gene frequency differences between Tibetans and Han Chinese in and around the EPAS1 gene. This group of researchers also found that the genetic variants of EPAS1 that were most common in Tibetans were linked to lower levels of hemoglobin, which indicates lower red blood cell counts. All of those observations made a lot of sense in light of what was already known about the function of EPAS1 and fit with previous observations of Tibetans' low red blood cell counts at high altitudes, their resistance to altitude sickness, and their relatively high fertility at high altitudes. All the different lines of evidence point to the same explanation. The EPAS1 gene and the region around it seems to have been a target of selection as Tibetans moved to higher altitudes and faced the challenges of a low-oxygen environment. This is natural selection at work. Those ancient Tibetans who through natural genetic variation, were less likely to die from altitude sickness, were obviously more likely to pass on their genes to the next generation. This slowly became more efficient over countless generations, with those best suited to survive the environment, more likely to pass on their genes. Which is no different than the example I gave in my original video. It has nothing to do with intelligent design, and to be honest, I find that claim extremely bizarre. And I can't help but think that anyone who would make such a bizarre claim would have to be incredibly ignorant of the very fundamentals of the theory of evolution. Oh, and for the record, I don't think Tibetans are either superior or inferior, just different. And no, different doesn't mean deserving of less rights, you fuckwit, so don't even try to put those words in my mouth. Next.
The one to continue on. There's no superiority in it. In fact, evolutionarily, the more biodiversity you have, the better. So
from a certain point of view, he is correct. But that doesn't mean that some dominant adaptations aren't extremely important. Diversity in red blood cells, amongst the Tibetan population, would not be good for those individuals with blood that has a higher clotting factor. For example.
Anyways. So, my point being, yeah, someone who's a good hunter does not actually make their genes better. Now, he makes one point.
No, I never said being a good hunter makes their genes better, just that stronger hunters are more likely to survive than weaker ones. And if you survive longer, then you have a greater chance to pass on your genes. This is real basic stuff, dude.
One final fallacy I'm going to address here. He talks about how, from an evolutionary standpoint, patriarchy emerged because of childbirth. And the funny thing is, I made the exact same argument in my video, and if he just copied-pasted that, not only would he not be quote-mining me, I'd be able to sum up that argument better than him.
Once again, I never quote-mined, nor was the fucking video about you. Also, I never claimed you believed otherwise. In fact, the only thing I said about you, Gnomelord, was. The link to that guy's full video is below, as always. He does a fairly good job of summing up feminist patriarchy theory. That's it, dude. Get over yourself.
Yes, patriarchy exists because childbearing, because it takes a really long time to raise children, and the survival of the species back then, which is no longer an issue now, at least not from a reproduction standpoint, required women to be constantly pregnant. If losing all of your women in a single battle would destroy your entire tribe, with losing men were replaceable.
Which actually was the basis of my entire argument.
Yes, women were, from a biological standpoint, more valuable. Here's the thing. Valuable does not equal powerful.
And I never claimed otherwise. It's amazing, we have now gone through 22 minutes of babbling bullshit, only to reach the point where he agrees with my basic premise. Absolutely amazing.
Slaves are valuable. They're worth money. If I were a slave owner, it's in my economic best interest to keep my slaves alive. That doesn't make them powerful, that just makes them valuable. Valuable implies property, motherfucker!
No, actually valuable implies importance. The vast majority of parents would consider their children to be valuable. That doesn't mean the vast majority of parents would sell their children. I value my friends, that does not mean I own my friends. I value honesty and logic. That doesn't mean these things are items for sale to the highest bidder. Implying that value equals property is not only an oversimplification, but extremely moronic. Just saying.
That's the thing! Just because women were valuable does not mean they had power, because who made the choice? Men! They were the—
No. Men did not just wake up one sunny Tuesday morning around 200,000 BC, and on a whim decide that females would be the ones having babies. Do I need to go through the birds and the bees with you? I really hope I don't. I don't know if I could get drunk enough to cope with that conversation.
The ones who made the choice, there's never been a matriarchy. Find me an example, you will not. Or polygamy. For those who don't know, it's multiple wives. If I didn't throw the Book of Mormon away, I'd be pointing at that. Fact is, there's never been a society with a reverse version of polygamy.
Idiot. I even cover this in the video. It's one of my main points. Female reproduction is limited to one pregnancy at a time. If a woman had 10 husbands, she would still only be limited to one pregnancy at a time. Whereas a male with multiple wives can impregnate more than one at a time. From the viewpoint of producing children, which he admits is of vast importance, one works and the other does not. Also, if a man has multiple wives, everyone gets to pass on their genes. This is not the case of a wife with multiple husbands. And Professor Robert Sapolsky also discussed polygamous societies. But by all means, just ignore that. A husband with multiple wives may be arguably unfair to the wives, but it was practical in many cultures. The reverse is neither fair nor practical. And I hate to tell you this, but when it comes to the survival of a culture, fairness takes a backseat to practicality.
Always been men picking women. So when the whole thing of like, women picked the men who were the most fertile and suitable, no, women didn't pick shit.
Once again, idiotic. To claim that no women anywhere have ever had a say in who they mate with, throughout the entirety of human existence is pure idiotic. But then again, I shouldn't be surprised. After all, gender studies has taught this guy that women were property throughout history. What a blinkered, narrow-minded view of the world.
Marriages were arranged by men. Men had multiple wives in most societies for a very, very long time. Monogamy is a fairly recent concept from a biological historical period standpoint. Fact is, women did not get to voice jack in this. And finally, he makes this one interesting point. By interesting, I mean fucking demented. We said that's why women like this, and he shows a picture of women who go to strip clubs like to look at this. And he shows a picture of like a really muscular man, and don't like this. He shows a picture of a 9-year-old.
A fucking 9-year-old? Are you fucking serious? It's a skinny guy, you fucking moron. Wow. This guy is either incredibly stupid, or just a dishonest cunt.
We're in the pedophilia thing.
And this is what is known as projection.
Okay. Christ in heaven. This is what we call a logical leap. Because he's talking about how, from an evolutionary standpoint, women are more valuable, evolutionarily speaking.
Which was one of the main points of my video.
Which led to sexism. Which, again, I remind you, as I said in my last video, something being pragmatic doesn't make it ethical.
Yeah, I agree. But when the survival of the species is at stake, practicality is more important than ethics. You can't judge ancient societies by the luxury standards of the modern West. You have to consider the circumstances of the time. Modern ethics is a byproduct of large stable societies.
There's many things that are pragmatic that are morally atrocious. I mean, we could solve our overpopulation problem by killing half the population. That doesn't make it okay. But ignoring that, let's talk, one, women do not have a universal standard of what they're attracted to. In fact, many women have a wide variety of attractions. If you, talk to them, women are attracted to a wide variety of things. People who are not traditionally attractive can get laid all the time.
None of which I deny. In fact, Professor Robert Sapolsky's segment in my video talks about tournament species and pair bonding species, and how humans are somewhere in between. I never suggested that women only mate with guys with muscles, just that there is a preference. But obviously not the only factor. Men, on average, prefer busty women. For example, that does not mean that men only like busty women, or that all men like busty women, or that all men like women, for that matter, because obviously, some men are gay. It also doesn't mean that there haven't been cultures that have a bias against liking busty women. I have never denied cultural influence. But none of that changes the fact that most men enjoy looking at a pair of tits, somewhat on the larger side. And obviously, sexual attractiveness is not the only factor most people look for when finding a mate.
It happens all the time. There's not a single model that women like. It's not true. Secondly, that whole thing of the big six-pack guy notice that that's one culture. That's not a universal human thing. In Japan, for example, what they consider really masculine, we consider rather effeminate looking. To us, it looks like men trying to dress like women. That's not very masculine by our standards, but masculine by their standards. Or, in ancient Greece, small penises were better. Small penises were seen as the sign of virility.
In that case, I'm sure he would have fit right in. Yeah, I know it was a lowbrow shot. But come on, we both know you were thinking the exact same thing.
Intelligence and restraint and manliness, and large penises, aka the Gauls, as they were traditionally depicted, were barbaric and savage and stupid and, lacking any civility. Or makeup, which in our society men don't wear makeup, back in many countries makeup was and is today considered a sign of masculinity. These are not absolutes, these vary from culture to culture. In the United States, big muscle men with six-packs, that's masculine. That's attractive to women. And that's not a universal truth. That's not, that's not an absolute rule. It varies from culture to culture. Almost every single beauty conception is different in different culture. Being fat was seen as hot. Being short was seen as hot. Being, wide variety of hairstyles that we now call stupid. You look at the 80s and you look at the fucking stupid styles they had, people thought that was cool. People thought the 80s styles were awesome, and fact is, back in the 80s, they were awesome, apparently. Thank God I wasn't in the 80s.
Once again, I'm not denying cultural influences. My point is that it's not only cultural influences. I made this point clearly in my original video.
Finally, what people find attractive is not what they reproduce with. If that was the case, strippers would be the most, the greatest sperm donors in the world, ignoring the fact that most male strippers are gay. What we find attractive is not who we settle down with most of the time.
Once again, Professor Robert Sapolsky covered this in my original video, when he spoke about pair bonding and tournament species.
Even when we have an option, that's not how it works. Human beings don't work that way. So finally, what's the point I'm laboriously trying to get to? Because, I am very smart, I do talk very fast, and as handsome and attractive as that makes me, it can be a little bit hard to pin down what exactly I'm saying. Here's the point I'm saying. Evolution doesn't work that way. There's no logic to an evolution. There's not a sort of divine ordinance.
Lucky I never claimed such a thing then.
It's trying to make it so that the best men are chosen because they can hunt. And that the women choose those men. They continue the species to lead us to this glorious human future because you realize...
Okay. So we have established he doesn't have a clue about evolution. And doesn't understand natural selection, or sexual selection as mechanisms of evolution.
That's how fucking eugenicist that sounds. No, there's dumb fucking luck. 2, women didn't have a choice in any of that shit, so don't even start there. 3, and finally, you haven't proven any differences between men and women. You've just proven that our society, back in the most primitive days, divided men and women based on gender lines because men are a little bit more body mass because we are descended from a species who has more body mass. That doesn't actually prove anything. All that proves is that in tribal societies, we had different gender roles based upon who had kids and who didn't have kids. That's not relevant to today because guess what, fellas? We're not in a tribal society anymore. Things have changed. Good night.
Does this halfwit actually believe that I'm promoting gender roles in modern society, just because I discussed them in ancient societies? Really? I guess he didn't see this part of my video. I do agree with feminists that strict gender roles in modern society are no longer needed. Because of modern medicine, clean drinking water, and abundance of food, and modern contraception, women no longer need be restricted to reproduction and child care. But that also means males no longer need to be disposable. Well, that was a harrowing experience. It's almost like Sale Polani had a hairy mongoloid potato baby, fathered by a close relative. But, I have to ask, how could he come to such bizarre conclusions, based on my video? I mean, no one else did. My first theory is, he has internalized confirmation bias, symbiotically attached to his self-identity, and expressed externally through a rigid ideological structure. This reinforces a sense of blinkered intellectual superiority, which is really just his ego covering up his actual incredulity. Or, he's just a fucking dickhead. Either way, I don't intend to reply to any more of his insanely long-winded videos. Not unless he actually discusses points I've made, not straw men or assumptions. And he is actually concise and to the point. I've actually got better things to do with my time. Speaking of which, the Gender Dilemma Episode 3 is on its way, and the Propaganda of Toxic Feminism Part 20 won't be far behind. So until next time folks, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
So, okay, why? The question for this video is, why was every single society male-dominated? Well, three important things. Firstly, before I move on, for most of human history, you could even argue for today, almost all of the wealth was in the hands of a very, very small minority, with everyone else living shitty lives. You know, let's say the Roman Empire was one of the greatest empires ever. Even at its height, even during the Five Good Emperor period, you still had 90% of the population living in rural poverty, with 10% actually, like, having wealth. And that was considered, like, fantastic by the standards of the time. Like, that was considered pretty good. You know, most of human history, the odds are your life is going to be nasty, brutish, and short. Even ignoring wealth inequality, there's disease, there's war, there's famine, there's natural disasters, there's more war, there's more disease, there's oppressive local aristocrats who are terrible, there's religious conflict. It's really shit. Life was pretty shit for most people for most of history. Even today, life is pretty shit for most people, if you go by percentage. So, and remember, power is a zero-sum game. There was a very, very small amount of people who had power, and lots of people who wanted it. And so allowing women to get power was not advantageous for men. After all, if I'm struggling as much as I possibly can to compete with all the other men out there, why would I want to allow women in? Because that just adds more people to compete with. I mean, that's a lot of reason why poor white people are very opposed to feminism, because they're having a hard enough time getting by just based on, you know, currently, how much harder is it going to be if they had to share an equal playing field with even more competition? So when you have existing inequality for something else, that usually exacerbates other inequality. Again, let's go during the American Civil War, many of the people who were opposed to ending slavery were non-slave owning poor immigrants, like the Irish, or the Poles, or the Italians, because they were afraid that the newly freed black slaves would work for less money and thus steal their jobs, you know. Or, to take another Southern example, in the South, during Reconstruction, the poorest period of Southern history, the most violently racist people would not be the rich whites. They would be the poor whites who were just above the blacks, because the only power and privilege they had was being white. They had no other power. They were dirt poor, terrible circumstances, no jobs, alcoholics, awful family life. So the one thing they had going for them in terms of power and status was that they could look down on black people or women. And so that's the thing you need to understand, is that when people are being oppressed, they will usually take it out on those below them, and even if they don't want to compete with anybody else. It's a very, when you have a cutthroat world, you get cutthroat people. That's just a side effect of life.